I want to tell you something that I've never said out loud before, not to my wife before she passed, not to my therapist, not to the priest who came to visit me in this nursing home last Tuesday, something that has sat in my chest like a stone for 70 years, getting heavier with every breath, every birthday card I didn't receive, every Christmas morning spent staring at an empty chair. My name is Arthur, though nobody calls me that anymore, and I am 93 years old. And I need you to understand that having children was the worst decision I ever made, not because they were bad kids, not because they failed me, because I failed them, and in failing them, I destroyed the only thing that might have made this long, slow ending bearable. I want you to pause this video right now and look around your room, wherever you're watching from. Maybe you're in your car during your lunch break. Maybe you're lying in bed with the screen too close to your face. Maybe you're sitting in the same kind of institutional chair I'm in with the same vinyl cracking under your weight, and I want you to tell me in the comments, where are you right now? What city? What country? What room? And then tell me how many children you have, or if you're thinking about having them, or if you decided not to. I need to know who I'm talking to, because what I'm about to say might change how you see everything, or it might make you hate me, or it might make you call your kids right now while you still can. I grew up in a different world, a world where men didn't talk about their feelings, where providing meant disappearing into a factory or an office and emerging 20 years later with a gold watch and a heart full of things you never said. And I bought into all of it, every single lie, and by the time I realized what I had done, my children had already learned to live without me. Margaret and I married young, too young, the way everyone did in 1952, and she wanted babies immediately, the way women were supposed to. And I wanted to be a good husband, a good provider, a good man, so I said yes, and within 5 years we had 3 children, David, then Susan, then the baby, Michael, and I remember holding each of them in the hospital, this overwhelming terror disguised as love, this sense that I had made a mistake so large it could never be undone. But I pushed that down because that's what you did. You pushed it down and you went to work, and you believed that love was something you demonstrated through discipline and distance and the occasional stiff hug. I was a good provider. I want you to understand that. I worked 60, 70 hours a week at the accounting firm. I climbed the ladder. I bought the house with the good school district. I paid for braces and college tuition and weddings. And I told myself that this was fatherhood, this was sacrifice, this was what it meant to be a man. But I never knew them. I never knew that David was afraid of the dark until he was 12. And I found him sleeping with a flashlight under his pillow during a camping trip I almost didn't attend. I never knew that Susan wrote poetry, beautiful, devastating poetry that she showed to her mother but never to me because she assumed I wouldn't understand. I never knew that Michael, my youngest, my baby, was gay, not until he was 32 and dying of AIDS in a hospital in San Francisco. And by then it was too late to tell him that I loved him exactly as he was, that I was sorry for every slur I'd let slide in his presence, every time I'd talked about him needing to find a nice girl and settle down. I was so busy being a good man that I forgot to be a good father, and now I sit in this room with its beige walls and its smell of disinfectant and its window that looks out onto a parking lot, and I count the days since my children last called, and I understand with perfect clarity that I am being punished, not by God, not by fate, but by the simple arithmetic of cause and effect, by the knowledge that you cannot plant neglect and harvest connection. David calls once a month, dutiful, brief, updating me on his grandchildren, who I have never met because he lives in Seattle and I can't travel and he can't afford to visit, and I hear in his voice the same distance I taught him, the same emotional bookkeeping that calculates the minimum required investment to maintain the appearance of relationship. Susan sent me a card on my birthday, a generic thing with flowers on it, signed Love Sue in handwriting I barely recognized, and I held that card for an hour, trying to remember the last time she called me Dad instead of Arthur, trying to remember when she stopped looking at me with hope and started looking at me with resignation. And Michael, my Michael, is 15 years in the ground, and I still talk to him at night. I still apologize. I still explain that I didn't know how to love him the way he needed because nobody ever taught me. Because my own father was a silent ghost who left for work before I woke and returned after I slept, and I thought I was breaking that cycle by being physically present in the house, by not drinking, by not hitting, but I broke it only to create something worse, a father who was there but not present, who provided everything except the one thing children actually need, which is to feel like they matter to you more than your ambition, more than your exhaustion, more than your own carefully maintained emotional fortress. I want to tell you about the moment I really knew what I had done. It was 1987, and Michael had just told us he was moving to San Francisco, and I said something cruel, something about him running away from responsibility, something about real men facing their problems, and he looked at me with such sadness, such infinite tired sadness, and he said, "No, Dad, I've been trying to get you to see me for 20 years, and I'm done trying." And he left, and I didn't stop him, and I didn't call him for 3 years. Not until his mother told me he was sick, and by then he had built a whole life without me, a community of friends who loved him, a partner who held his hand in the hospital, and I was a stranger at his bedside, offering money for treatments because that's all I knew how to offer, and he looked at me and said, "I don't need your money, Arthur. I needed you to show up." And I couldn't. I still couldn't. I stood there with my checkbook and my guilt and my complete inability to be the father he deserved. And I watched him die without ever really knowing him, without ever understanding what made him laugh, what made him afraid, what made him him. And Susan, my Susan, she tried, she really tried. She would call and I would be busy. I was always busy. There was always a client dinner or a golf game or some other excuse. And eventually she stopped trying. And now she's a grandmother herself. And I see her on Facebook through the nursing home computer. I see her with her grandchildren. I see her being the kind of parent I never was, present and engaged and emotionally available, and I'm proud of her. I'm so proud it hurts, but I'm also jealous of her children for having what I never gave her, and ashamed that my example taught her what not to do, that the only useful thing I provided was a negative template. And David, my firstborn, the one who looks most like me, who followed me into accounting, who I thought understood me best, he told me last year during one of our monthly calls that he's been in therapy for 20 years, that he's been trying to undo the damage of having a father who treated love like a business transaction, who measured affection in dollars and hours spent together rather than in attention and curiosity and emotional risk. He told me that he struggles to connect with his own children, that he hears my voice in his head when he's impatient with them, that he's terrified of becoming me, and I wanted to tell him that I was sorry, that I didn't know, that I was doing my best with the tools I had, but the words stuck in my throat because I wasn't doing my best, was I? I was doing what was expected, what was easy, what allowed me to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of actually caring, actually needing, actually being present for the inevitable disappointments and heartbreaks of loving other humans. I chose safety over connection, and I got exactly what I chose: a safe, empty life, a fortress with no visitors, a bank account with no one to leave it to who actually wants it. You want to know the cruelest part? I love them. I love them still, with an intensity that scares me, a hunger for their presence that wakes me up at 3 a.m. gasping for air. I remember every moment of connection we had, every rare conversation that went deeper than surface, and I replay them like precious jewels. The time David asked my advice about a girl, and I actually listened instead of lecturing. The time Susan read me one of her poems, and I told her it was beautiful and meant it. The time Michael hugged me at his mother's funeral, and I hugged him back instead of patting his shoulder and pulling away. Those moments are all I have now, and they are so few, so achingly few, compared to the years of absence. The thousands of missed opportunities to say the right thing, to ask the right question, to simply be there in the room with them without my mind somewhere else calculating, planning, escaping. I want to go back. I want to go back to 1957 and tell that terrified young man holding his firstborn son that the fear he feels is not a sign that he's unfit, but a sign that he understands the stakes, that the only way through is to let that fear open him instead of close him, to let it make him softer instead of harder, to let it teach him that love is not a performance of competence, but a willingness to be incompetent together. I want to tell him that the promotions don't matter, that the house doesn't matter, that the respect of his colleagues doesn't matter, that what matters is showing up for the small moments, the bedtime stories he was too tired to read, the games he was too busy to attend, the fears he was too uncomfortable to hear. I want to tell him that his children will not remember his salary, but they will remember whether he looked at them when they talked, whether he remembered their interests, whether he made them feel like the most interesting people in the world when they were with him. But I can't go back. I can only sit here in this chair with my memories and my regrets and my knowledge that I had everything that mattered and I traded it for things that don't, that I was given the gift of 3 beautiful souls to guide and protect, and I treated them like obligations, like interruptions, like props in the story of my own success, and now I'm alone. Not completely alone. I have nurses, I have the other residents who play bridge on Tuesdays, I have the television and my books and my memories, but alone in the way that matters, alone in the way that comes from knowing that the people who should care whether I live or die have learned to live without me, have built lives that are complete and meaningful and don't include a space for a father who never made space for them. I get letters from David, formal updates about his work and his children, and I read them like a detective looking for clues that he still needs me, still wants me, still thinks about me with anything other than the resigned acceptance of an obligation to be discharged. I get birthday cards from Susan with increasingly distant signatures. I get nothing from Michael, just the silence of the grave, which is at least an honest silence, unlike the polite silences I get from the living. And I think about what I would do differently, if I could, and the answer is everything. I would do everything differently. I would work less and play more. I would listen instead of lecture. I would be afraid with them instead of pretending to be strong for them. I would let them see me fail and struggle and need them, because that's what builds connection. That's what builds family, not the pretense of perfection, but the shared reality of imperfection. I would tell Michael every day that I loved him exactly as he was, that his happiness mattered more than my expectations, that I was proud of his courage to be himself in a world that made that dangerous. I would tell Susan that her poetry was not a hobby, but a gift, that her sensitivity was not a weakness, but a strength, that I wanted to know everything she thought and felt, even when I didn't understand it. I would tell David that he didn't have to be like me, that he could be something else, something more, that I would love him no matter what he chose to do with his life, that my love was not conditional on his success, but I didn't, and now I can't. And the weight of that, the absolute finality of it, is what makes this the worst decision of my life. Not having children, but having them, and then failing to become the father they deserved, having them, and then making them feel like burdens instead of blessings, having them, and then teaching them by my example that love is something you earn through achievement rather than something you receive simply by existing. If you're watching this and you have children, I want you to pause again and really think about when you last looked at them without distraction, when you last asked them a question about their inner life and actually listened to the answer, when you last told them that you loved them not for what they did, but for who they were. I want you to think about whether your children feel safe coming to you with their failures, their fears, their confusions, or whether they have learned to perform competence for you, to hide their struggles, to maintain the fiction that they are always okay because they know that your love is contingent on their okayness. I want you to consider whether you are building the same fortress I built, whether you are making the same trade I made, whether you are going to end up in your own version of this chair, counting the days between phone calls, wondering when your children became strangers. And if you don't have children, if you're watching this trying to decide whether to have them, I want you to know that the question is not whether you can provide for them financially, whether you can give them a good life in material terms. The question is whether you are willing to be transformed by them, whether you are willing to have your heart broken open and never fully closed again, whether you are willing to be present for the daily, grinding, beautiful work of loving another person without guarantee of return, without control, without the comfortable distance that allows you to maintain your illusions about yourself. Because if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to be changed, to be challenged, to be made vulnerable in the most terrifying ways, then don't do it. Don't have children. Spare them the burden of learning to live without your presence. Spare yourself the burden of this regret, this knowledge that you had the chance to create the most meaningful connections possible and you chose safety instead. I am 93 years old and I have lived a successful life by every external measure, and I would trade all of it, every dollar, every accolade, every moment of professional pride for one more day with my children.